It's easy to look at a garden and quickly see the beauty that we get from our garden soil. However, have you ever thought about the other beauty that might come from our soil? Now, we live in Oklahoma and we all know that we are famous for our red dirt, but what really makes that red dirt? Well, if you've ever seen rusted iron, you probably know. In fact, there is a high volume of iron in our Oklahoma soils, and with all the oxidation and the water that it receives, that's what actually turns that iron red, giving our soil that red color. Now, we have a high diversity of soils for the area of Oklahoma. In fact, we have 2,500 different types of soils. However, one of the most well-known soils is the Port Silt loam, which is identified in 33 of the 77 counties in the state of Oklahoma. In fact, it's actually recognized as our state soil. Did you know we had a state soil? I didn't either. But today we're going to talk about how to have fun with our soil. Just because the gardening season is winding down doesn't mean that you still can't play in the dirt. And today we are going to talk about one way of doing that. So you can see here I've collected a sample of different soils from Oklahoma. And what you're going to do when you do this is first collect a sample, and you really don't need that much of each one. I just kind of got a sandwich baggie of some of them. But you can see it's really just a couple of tablespoons that you might actually use. What you're going to do is pick out any debris that might be in there, leaves, twigs, things like that. You're just after the actual soil, not the organic matter that might be a part of that. Then the next thing you're going to do is allow it to dry down. So make sure to put it in a warm, hot area to allow it to lose that moisture. And then once it has, you're going to just pulverize it so that it's a finer texture. And you can do that with just like a hammer and a container if you want to, like I've done here. You could also use maybe a rolling pin or something and actually break it up that way. Or even a mortar and pestle if you can find one that you're not using in the kitchen anymore. So there's a couple of options. Once you get that kind of into more of a real fine powder, then what you're going to need is some clear acrylic paint. And so we've got a bottle of it here. And we're just going to go ahead and put a little bit in some of our wells here. And then you're going to take whatever kind of soil you want. And really the soil is what adds the pigment to our paint. So we're going to take some of this kind of red and just sprinkle a little bit on top of there. And then we're going to do some kind of light brown. And then we're going to do one of these darker colored ones here as well. And you also want to add a few drops of water. So this is just water. You want to be sparing with this. Of course, the more concentration of pigment you use, and also the more water you use, it's going to affect how saturated that color is when you're actually painting with it. So we're just going to mix these up here, and that will then turn into your paint that you can paint with. So I'm just going to use this now, and what we've got here is just your traditional watercolor paper. So this is really good because it actually absorbs some of that moisture as well as the pigment. And so then you can just paint just like this. You can see you can get that red rusty color on your paper. So depending on how good of an artist you are, you can either do it freehand and get creative with it, or you can do something to trace. If you can see this, this is a horse that was traced that you can then paint over that. So if you have young kids, it might be easier to trace something and then let them paint it. But it's just a fun way to kind of get out there and still get messy in the dirt. And also, it might be a good way of preserving your garden even after those plants are gone. For more information, visit Oklahoma Ag in the Classroom.
We hope you enjoyed this video as part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on the OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.